At 1 in the morning, Eli Mercer pushed 3 queens across a whiskey-stained table and heard the whole saloon stop breathing. He had won $32, a broken wagon team, and a false map to a dry claim. Then Silas Voss pointed toward the back wall. "That too," he said. The last thing in the wager was not a thing at all. She stood beside the stove where the smoke gathered thickest, a young Chinese woman in a faded indigo jacket, her black hair pinned with a carved bone comb. She was small, still, and so controlled that the men in the room mistook her silence for obedience. Eli did not. He saw the white line of her knuckles around the comb. He saw her eyes moving, measuring exits, faces, distance, danger. Voss called her his kitchen girl. He said her father had owed money in Marysville, then Sacramento, then here. He said debt traveled, and so did collateral. A few men laughed because it was easier than admitting what was happening in front of them. Eli had come to Marrow Creek for flour and horseshoe nails. He had stayed because loneliness has a way of turning one drink into 2. He had sat in on the game because Voss had smiled too widely when he pulled the woman into the room. Now the cards lay face up. 3 queens. Across from him, Silas Voss stared at his own hand. 2 black 8s and nothing else. The saloon stayed silent. Eli should have felt lucky. Instead, the room seemed to tilt. He had not won a woman. No man could win a person. But if he said that too loud, Voss would drag her back through the kitchen door before Eli could rise from his chair. So Eli gathered the coins with one shaking hand, left the false map on the table, and stood. Voss leaned close enough for Eli to smell clove tobacco on his breath. "Enjoy your trouble, Mercer," he said. "She eats quiet, but she costs loud." Eli looked past him. "Ma'am," he said, rough and awkward, "you can walk out with me." The woman did not move. The men watched for the old pattern, a command, a shove, a hand on her arm. Eli gave none of them that satisfaction. He stepped back from the door, leaving the path open. "Or not," he added, "but he doesn't take you." For the first time, her eyes met his. There was no gratitude there. Gratitude would have been too easy. What he saw was judgment. Then she walked forward, not behind him, not ahead of him, beside him. And as they crossed the plank floor, Eli understood that every man in Marrow Creek had seen the same thing and chosen to name it differently. Outside, the night air was cold enough to cut through whiskey. The woman climbed into his buckboard without help. Eli took the reins, and the town watched him leave with a silence that felt like a sentence. His ranch sat 12 miles beyond the last freight road, tucked under a ridge of black juniper and pale stone. It was not much, a cabin, a barn, 2 corrals, and a spring-fed ditch that kept 6 acres of grass alive in a country determined to dry everything out. When they reached it, the moon had gone low. Eli opened the cabin door and stepped aside. "There's a bed," he said, pointing. "You take it." She looked at the single room, the cold hearth, the shelf of dented tins, the rifle pegs over the door. Her gaze missed nothing. Then she took the wooden chair by the table and sat with her hands folded, as if sleep was something she had not trusted in a long time. Eli set a cup of water near her. He placed bread and salted beans beside it. He wanted to explain that she owed him nothing, that the door did not lock from the outside, that he did not know what to do because there was no decent way to receive a person after a gambling table had named her property. But every sentence felt too small for the wrong done to her. Only, I'll be outside. In the barn, with his coat for a blanket and the horses breathing warm in the dark, Eli lay awake until dawn. He had thought loneliness was the heaviest thing a man could carry. He was wrong. Shame weighed more. For 4 days they lived around each other like weather. Eli rose before sunrise and left food on the table. When he returned, the plate was washed and placed exactly where he had set it. He found his torn cuffs mended with thread pulled from a flour sack. He found the hearth swept. He found small green leaves drying on a clean board near the window, sorted with a care that made no sense to him. She did not run. She did not speak. And she did not soften. On the 5th morning, Eli rode into Marrow Creek for supplies. He had half a sack of flour left, no coffee, and a mare whose shoes were wearing thin. He told himself he was not afraid of town. That was a lie. Voss was waiting outside the general store with 2 freight hands and the confidence of a man who owned more doors than he opened. "Well," Voss called, "if it isn't the gentleman gambler, how's that bluebird settling in your cage?" The freight hands laughed. Eli tied his horse and went inside. The storekeeper, Nora Pike, had sold to Eli for 7 years. That morning she would not meet his eyes. "Need flour," he said. "Coffee if you've got it. Nails, too." Nora glanced toward the window, where Voss stood smiling. "Can't sell on credit." "I'm paying coin." "Stock spoken for." Behind her, sacks of flour climbed the wall in neat white rows. A barrel of coffee sat open under his nose. Eli felt heat crawl up his neck. He could fight Voss. He could not fight every frightened person Voss had pressed under his thumb. So he left with empty saddlebags and rode home with anger working at him like a dull knife. Halfway down his own valley he heard the mare screaming. Her name was Juniper, a gray little horse with a stubborn heart. She stood trembling in the corral, one foreleg lifted, blood dark against the dust. A broken strand of wire had torn a deep mouth through the flesh below her knee. Eli's stomach dropped. In that country, a bad leg could end a horse faster than a bullet. He led her into the barn, grabbed whiskey, rags, and a branding iron, then shoved kindling into the stove. The woman appeared in the doorway. She looked at the wound. She looked at the iron. Then she crossed the barn and stood between Eli and the fire. She shook her head. "No," Eli said, trying to keep his voice calm. "It has to be sealed." She shook her head again, sharper. Juniper thrashed, but the woman turned to the horse and made a low sound, not a word, more like water moving over stone. Her palm rested on the mare's neck. Slowly, impossibly, the animal stilled. The woman pointed to the creek. Eli stared at her. "You want weeds?" She held his gaze, not pleading, insisting. He lowered the branding iron. She returned with willow bark, crushed leaves, and a fistful of clean moss from the shaded bank. She tore a strip from the lining of her own jacket and washed it in boiled water. Then she knelt in the straw and began to work. Her hands were precise, not lucky, not gentle by accident, trained. She cleaned the gash until the blood ran thin. She packed it with a dark paste that smelled bitter and sharp. She bound the leg tight enough to hold, loose enough to spare the swelling. When Eli tried to hand her whiskey, she pushed it away and pointed to the kettle instead. Hot water, not fire. Patience, not panic. When she finished, she held up 3 fingers and pointed to the sun. 3 mornings. Eli looked at the mare who had stopped shaking. Then he looked at the woman. For the first time since the saloon, he understood that the silence around her was not emptiness. It was a locked room full of tools. On the 3rd morning, Juniper put weight on the leg. The swelling had gone down. The wound looked clean. No fever, no rot, no death creeping in from the edges. Eli stood beside the stall door, humbled in a way he did not know how to name. The woman entered with fresh bandage cloth over one arm. Eli stepped aside without being asked. She noticed. A small thing changed in her face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first inch of room for it. That evening, Eli set a tin plate of cornmeal on the table. Before he could wipe the spill away, she dipped one finger into the yellow dust and wrote 3 careful marks. Lin Yue, she pointed to herself. Lin Yue, Eli repeated. His tongue stumbled over it. This time she almost smiled. He pointed to his own chest. Eli. She nodded once. He pulled an old slate from the shelf, the one his mother had used when he was a boy, and wrote a single word. Horse. Then he pointed toward the barn. Lin Yue studied the letters. She copied them slowly beneath his. Her handwriting was better than his. After that, the cabin changed. Words appeared on the slate. Water, fire, bread, safe, no, yes. Eli learned that no was the first English word she had understood clearly in his barn. She learned that safe was the word he had meant at the cabin door and failed to prove. Little by little, her story came through gestures, fragments, and lines drawn in dust. Her father had kept an herb shop near the rail camps. He had treated men with burned hands, fever, cough, broken ribs, and no money. Voss had supplied food and liquor to those camps, then wrote debt into 2 books, one for the clerk, one for himself. When Lin Yue's father challenged the numbers, he disappeared on a winter road between camps. Voss took the shop. Then he took Lin Yue, not because she was useless, because she could read both books. The poker game had not been a drunken insult. It had been a laundering. Voss meant for one of his own men to win her, carry her south, and make her vanish before anyone asked why a dead herbalist's daughter knew too much. Very still while he understood it. There are angers that burn hot and pass. This one went cold. The next morning, Voss made his second move. 3 riders came up the dry wash and stopped at the spring above Eli's ditch. They hammered survey stakes into the wet ground and stretched cord between them, as if the water had suddenly forgotten whose valley it fed. Eli walked out with his rifle in the crook of his arm. Lin Yue followed, carrying the slate. One of the riders unfolded a paper with a county seal. "New survey," he said. "Spring sits on Voss land now. Your ditch is trespass." "My patent runs to the ridge," Eli said. "According to Marrow Creek." The man smiled, as if law was just a hat anyone could wear after stealing it. Eli raised the rifle halfway. Lin Yue touched his sleeve. One touch, enough to stop him. She pointed to the paper, then to the seal. Then she wrote on the slate with a hand that did not shake. Same clerk, same book. Eli lowered the rifle. That was the darkest part of it. Not that Voss was stealing the spring, not even that the town would help him do it. It was realizing the trap had been built to make any honest reaction look like a crime. If Eli fired, he would hang. If he did nothing, the ranch would die. He rode for help. Lin Yue would be alone when Voss came, and Voss would come. That night, under a lamp so low it barely touched the walls, Lin Yue cut a narrow seam inside her indigo jacket. From the lining she removed a folded strip of oiled paper, thin as onion skin. It was covered in numbers, names, debts, payments, marks in English and Chinese. Beside one line sat Eli's own spring, described 2 months before the false survey was filed. Voss had written the theft down before pretending the law had discovered it. Eli stared at the paper. "You kept this?" Lin Yue looked at him, and for the first time she spoke more than a name. "My father said, 'Paper lies,'" she said, each word hard-won. "But paper also remembers." The sentence struck Eli deeper than any sermon. By dawn his horse was saddled. He had $27, half a pouch of cornmeal, and one chance. The federal office in Carson Junction, where land fraud tied to rail contracts might still matter to men outside Voss's reach. Before he rode out, Lin Yue pressed something into his hand. A knot of blue thread tied around a tiny bead of carved bone. "For find way back," she said. Eli closed his fingers around it. "I will," he answered. He left her with the rifle, the dog, and the spring. The rifle, the dog, and the spring. For 9 days the valley held its breath. Lin Yue worked from dark to dark. She changed Juniper's bandage. She carried water before Voss's men could muddy the ditch. She set snares for rabbits and dried roots on the cabin roof. When riders appeared on the ridge, she did not hide inside. She stood on the porch with the rifle across both palms and let them see she knew how to hold still without surrendering. On the 10th day, Voss came himself. He wore a black coat despite the heat, and he brought the county clerk in a sweating hat, plus 2 men with rope hanging from their saddles. Yue stood between them and the cabin. Voss smiled as if the old room in the saloon had returned, and every man there still belonged to him. "You've had your adventure," he said. "Mercer won a hand, not a war. Lin Yue said nothing. The clerk waved another paper. This woman remains attached to an unpaid contract. Voss has authority to retrieve. Lin Yue raised the slate. On it, in careful English, she had written 4 words. Debt paid twice already. The clerk's mouth shut. Voss's smile tightened. You don't know what that says, he snapped. Lin Yue turned the slate around, wiped it with her palm, and wrote the amount again. Not the clerk's number, Voss's number. Wrote the date, then her father's name. The freight hands shifted in their saddles. Men like that might follow cruelty, but they feared documents when documents looked back. Voss stepped down from his horse. You think writing makes you free? Lin Yue's hand moved toward the rifle. Before either of them could move further, hoofbeats rose from the lower road. 4 riders came into the yard, not Eli alone. 2 deputy marshals rode with him, their coats dusted white from travel. Behind them came a federal land agent with a leather case strapped to his saddle. Eli looked older than when he had left. His face was cut by sun and lack of sleep, but the blue thread knot was tied around his wrist. The senior marshal dismounted and took the oiled paper from Eli's vest. Silas Voss, he said, you are under arrest for fraudulent claim filing, debt coercion, bribery of a county officer, and unlawful detention. For 1 second, Voss looked not angry, but confused. The world he had built had always bent toward him. He could not understand why it had stopped. Then the marshal took his pistol. The clerk tried to run and fell in the dust before he reached his horse. Nobody laughed. That was the strange thing. In the saloon, men had laughed because laughter helped them survive what they were too cowardly to stop. In the yard, with the papers open and the truth plain, nobody could pretend not to see. The land agent checked Eli's patent. He checked the old survey stones along the ridge. He checked the spring and the ditch and the false stakes Voss had driven into the wet ground. By sunset, the stakes were pulled and stacked beside the barn like kindling. The spring was Eli's again. But Eli did not say that. When the papers were finished, he asked the agent for one more line. The man frowned. You want to add a name? Yes. Eli looked at Lin Yue. If she wants it. The agent hesitated. At the Chinese woman in the indigo jacket, at the rifle still resting near the porch, at the oiled paper that had brought a powerful man down. Then he dipped the pen. Lin Yue stepped to the table they had carried outside. Her hand hovered above the page. Eli pointed to the line. Land, he said. Then to the cabin. House. Then he touched his chest and shook his head. Not mine only. Lin Yue looked at him for a long time. She took the pen. In slow, deliberate letters, she wrote her name beside his. Lin Yue Mercer Ranch. Not wife, not servant, not collateral, not prize. A name on land that could no longer be gambled away by men who confused paper with truth. Autumn came quietly after that. Juniper healed with a white scar down her leg. The herb boards by the window multiplied. A small garden took hold beside the ditch, green where the valley had always been brown. The cabin filled with words written on slate, then paper, then spoken aloud without fear. Eli still made mistakes with Lin Yue's name, and she still corrected him until he got it right. One evening, the first frost silvered the grass. Eli found Lin Yue at the doorway, touching the carved bone comb in her hair. "You could go," he said, "anywhere. Marysville, Sacramento, grown people." She considered the valley, the barn, the spring, the horse breathing in the cold. Then she touched the blue thread knot still tied to his wrist. "I found way back, too," she said. Eli looked at the cabin behind them. It was still small, still rough, still one hard winter away from needing more than hope. But the silence inside it had changed. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of two people listening for the same future. Eli had walked out of Marrow Creek thinking he had won a hand. Lin Yue had survived because she understood what the men at that table never did. She understood what the men at that table never did. A card can win a night. A paper can steal a spring. But a home is built by the hands that refuse to turn another human being into either one.